Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room. We're an island show that likes to look at the big issues, and I can't imagine right now a bigger issue for myself and my co-host with the most, John Jurisic, than this British Columbia election. And boy, the outfall of this BC election, which is not yet decided. And boy, who expected that, John?
Such drama. We've never seen a race this close. It's still not decided, Robin. Currently, we're sitting at BC NDP with 46 seats, BC Conservatives, 45 seats, and BC Green Party at 2 seats.
And so what does Premier David Eby do in the wake of this one-seat margin? He gets up on the podium and he declares victory, sort of.
This has been a very, very hard-fought campaign, and we knew that every vote would matter, and that has certainly been the case. And it looks like we're going to have to wait just a little bit longer. Now, we don't know what the final count's going to be in the province, but what we do know is that there was a clear majority for the progressive values that I take a lot of comfort from that. There is also another message in this narrowest of margins. That's we got to do better. And that was our commitment to British Columbians. We got to do better. Let me tell you, I know that you deserve, that British Columbians deserve, that our whole province deserves a premier that's going to bring us together, not drive us apart.
Premier Eby still, hold on. There's still mail-in votes and votes from people who are traveling that have not been counted. Guess what? 49,000 of them. Come on now. These votes won't be added until the end of the week. And the kicker is 11 ridings could change hands depending on these votes and where they land.
In one of the very closest races, where the NDP hangs on by just a very, very slender thread, is Wanda Fuka-Malahat, and it's only, I believe, 23 votes that separates the NDP and the BC Conservative. And in Surrey Centre, it's also very close. It's under 100 votes there. And, well, you might think, gee, this is great. The NDP have these 2 wins, narrow wins. But we've heard now that these mail-in votes could make a big difference.
I love the historical context here, okay? Sheila Orr was running in 2001 in Victoria Hillside and lost by over 100 votes when the votes were counted after Election Day. But when the late ballots came in overseas and included out-of-town votes, she actually won by over 100. Flip-flop. It can happen.
Yep, she thought she'd lost on election night, and about a week later, she finds out that she'd won. The same was the case for Jeff Bray. And so this can happen. Sheila is closely monitoring this process as we speak. She says that many of the people that vote from overseas or have places in Phoenix or places in Palm Springs or places in Cabo where they go in the winter to stay warm, these are not people that don't have means. These are people that are comfortably middle class, and a lot of those folks vote center right. That's at least in Sheila's opinion. So how could this impact the final numbers for this election? And if the Conservatives turn this around, wouldn't that be a kicker?
Wouldn't it, though? No wonder John Rustad didn't go up on the podium Saturday night and sort of admit defeat. And the Conservatives, they are still likely wanting to admit success and victory. But here, who knows what's going to happen? Here's what Rustad had to say to his supporters.
We're going to fight every single day to try to make sure that we do everything we can to improve the lives of people in this province. People are counting on us. People are counting on the hope, on the opportunity, on the vision of what can be a British Columbia, a prosperous British Columbia, not one, quite frankly, that is in a welfare state that it is today. That is what we are going to continue to fight on as the Conservative Party of British Columbia, certainly now and over the years to come. And I can tell you something else. If we're in that situation of the NDP forming a minority government, we will look at every single opportunity from day one to bring them down at the very first opportunity and get back to the polls.
Meantime, BC Green Party leader Sonia Forstenow was defeated by incumbent NDP Minister Grace Lore in Victoria Beacon Hill. Although two Greens, now in North Saskatchewan the Islands and West Van Sea to Skye, were elected, two of them, and could and likely hold the balance of power if the numbers don't change. Even if they do change, they're not going to be that dramatic. Still, a tough night for Sonia.
Well, it's not just my voice I lost tonight. It has been such an honor to be an MLA. It's not the outcome that we'd hoped for in Victoria Beacon Hill tonight, but I'm so proud of the campaign that we ran. We knew we were up against a steep hill. We were trying something bold and new, but the challenge was a little more than we could do. I'm so heartened by the support that we got. I'm so heartened.
If the Conservatives are able to get 47 seats, then they don't need the Green Party. They have a majority. If they fall short of that, the Greens are in the driver's seat. And it's hard to believe the Greens would actually prop up a Conservative government, more likely to stand with the NDP. But they are going to have a grocery list in hand of things that they'll want in order to vote on side with David Eby. And to get an idea of the sorts of things that are on their mind, former MLA, Green Party MLA Adam Olsen, he was talking about the Greens wanting proportional representation brought in without a referendum. Just bring it in. And he says that's a number one demand for the Green Party. So lots of balls in the air, John. And now it's time, I guess, after all of this speculation, to turn to some veteran insight.
Yeah, some of this stuff it's still, woo! We're always happy to have UVic political scientist Dr. Michael Prince join us in the Rumble Room. So without further ado, let's zoom him in.
And now, once again, joining us in the Rumble Room, an esteemed guest from the University of Victoria. I love reading this. Lansdowne Professor of Social Policy, Acting Dean, longtime political scientist, Dr. Michael Prince. Welcome back.
Always great to be with you, Robin and John.
Well, we've got so many things to ask you about. Of course, we just had you on recently, and we all agreed at that time this was going to be a tight election. I thought it would be a little tighter than you were forecasting, so yep. I like to think I was right about that at least. So 46 NDP seats at the moment, 45 Conservatives and 2 Greens. Now, do you buy what former MLA Sheila Orr is saying right now about those 49,000 ballots that have not yet been counted? And those are, for the most part, people mailing in their votes from like holiday places, or they're away on holidays, or they have a place down in Phoenix or something like that, and they're mailing in their vote. Because she says when she ran in 2001, she lost on election night by over 100 votes. And then when they counted those votes, she won by about 140. Right. And the same was for Jeff Bray, because she says a lot of those people they have money, and they're not necessarily people who would commonly vote NDP. So we have a really close race right now in out in Souk in that riding, Wanda Fuca Malahat, I think it's 26 votes. This could easily flip over and be the Conservatives in the lead. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. That's what adds to the drama. Not just the sheer, I mean, on the one hand, the pollsters got it right, more or less. Sometimes we have elections where pollsters are all over the map, or they say something and then we wake up the next morning and go, God, did they ever get that wrong? But, throughout the last 4, 5, 6 weeks, the pollsters were saying statistical tie, dead heat, tight race. And I thought, overall, perhaps, but there's strengths in different regions where, in the north and in the Fraser Valley, et cetera. But to end up almost like 2017, where the two major parties are 1 or 2 seats apart, and the Greens are again in this little power broker role, this time with just 2 seats, last time with 3. Now, you're right. There's a chance that 1 or 2 seats could change depending on the mail-in ballots. You're absolutely right. So, I mean, we could see, I guess, the NDP have to be very nervous, thinking worst case scenario, 2 or 3 seats switched, and we end up with a Conservative majority, and suddenly any talk of a Green NDP alliance or a new confidence and supply agreement along the lines of the 2017 period between John Horgan and Andrew Weaver, those immediately fly out the window. So you're right. The foundations on which we're all speculating right now are pretty shaky. I
Yeah.
mean, what did you say? 49,000 mail-in ballots this time, which isn't as large a number as we've seen in other recent provincial elections. But given these razor-thin margins of victory that we currently see for the NDP, clearly hanging on by their fingernails in a couple of ridings, it's not hard to conceive that those could flip. And we could then see Mr. Rustad with 46 or 47 and the NDP dropping down. And
So if he has 47, he has a majority.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's the comfort zone. But even still, that would be a challenging. But what that's the story of the election night is this. And I think Mr. Rustad captured it appropriately in his speech that night. It wasn't a concession speech by far, because he was feeling pretty damn good about the results. And he just wanted to remind British Columbians about the historic magnitude of this.
Michael, let me interrupt you here.
Sure, go ahead.
But we're a uniquely Southern Vancouver angle. First of all, thanks so much for coming back on, especially a couple of days after the election. I'm sure we're number like 800 in your interview list. Nonetheless, listen, you predicted a narrow NDP victory. Congratulations. Yep. Premier Eby talked about this election showing a solid majority supporting progressive candidates. That was his theme post-election, including the Greens. I guess it's good that he feels this way, because obviously the Greens are going to have a lot to say about new legislation going forward. Yeah. Where do they fit into all of this stuff?
Yeah, well, again, what adds to, I mean, you can't make this up. This is like a Hollywood movie. There's layers upon layers of uncertainty here. One is the recount. So we've got that uncertainty. There's the uncertainty of finding a speaker of the House, which, typically is from the government side. So that would reduce the NDP's votes. We have 2 Green MLAs, both rookies. Now, when you look at these two gentlemen's bios, they both got impressive. One's a professional geologist, one's been a lawyer, one's worked in government. These are not young, early 20s Green candidates, of which there are many in every election. The young idealists with modest life experience and perhaps a limited career experience. These are older fellows who've got careers, but nonetheless, they're rookies. And their leader didn't win her seat. She took that bold move of running against Grace Lohr and Victoria Beacon Hill, and she admitted as such that night, election night, that they wanted to try something new and something bold. I heard that as saying she gambled, she took a big risk, and she fell well short, in a riding where clearly the NDP operation got out their vote. There are a lot of people supporting her. So you've got these 2 Green MLAs, neither of which have been in elected office at this level. Going into this context, John, you're right. So Sonia Furstenau is going to play a key role. Even though she didn't win her seat, she remains the leader. And I would think if there's going to be conversations between Green and the NDP, Sonia is going to play a key role, both as mentor and advisor, and as a go-between, perhaps between the Premier's office and perhaps some key caucus leaders out of the NDP on that side and on her side. You'll recall last time, John Horgan, he had Carol James as his emissary on behalf of the NDP. The Greens, with Andrew Weaver, they brought in Norman Spector, of all people, although now it seems that Andrew Weaver's politics are aligned with Norman Spector on the spectrum, political spectrum. But, will they agree to a formal confidence and supply agreement? What people's memories of that and how that worked out for Green? I would think at a minimum they'd have I would hope a short, focused list of 3 or 4 strategic issues that they'd like to see in not only a throne speech but in the budget, and I would think a modest legislative agenda that if the NDP or the government that they would put forward. Now, on the other hand, Mr. Eby, as you said, John, in his speech the other night, we saw a side of David Eby we didn't see throughout most of the campaign. I think a more humble Dave Eby, one who spoke about the diversity of the province and the differences, the need to come together. And also he made a point of speaking about safe communities, crime and law and order issues that clearly cost him seats in the Surrey area and other parts of the province.
I want to jump into that,
Sure,
Michael.
let's go.
It's being talked a lot about in the media and certainly online that this really was an election blown by David Eby. That David Eby should have won this handily. And that Vaughn Palmer wrote a column in the Vancouver Sun saying that Eby made a mistake right from the start by not calling an election when he first became leader. He thought that he could show people he had a healthcare program working, he had a housing program working, he was working on the whole file around drugs, and that people would be happy with that. And then he finds out at the doorstep that people really are very unhappy about the price of homes and all the problems on the streets. And he miscalculated, and to his disadvantage. Would you agree that this was an election that Eby is kind of accountable for?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, on the one hand, and he never really he could have said this on the television debate, and he didn't. He could have reminded British Columbians that he could have done what perhaps most premiers would have done, or a lot of politicians would have done: call a snap election. Even though we have a fixed election date, he decided not to do that. And then even after that first few months, when you thought, well, he's not going to call a snap, but maybe he's going to call one early. And he said, no, I'm going to, you know, how many times did he reassured the press? No, I'm not going to go. I know there's a fixed election date. Because I think he thought that it was a 4-party system in the province. He had 2 parties on the right that were fragmenting the vote, and the polls showed he had a comfortable lead. So he kind of thought, I got time on my side. Then suddenly the world shifts. But if they've been watching or tracking the polls over the last 8-9 months, even before the dramatic merger of the BC United and Conservatives, you could have said, things are going south for us. You know, let's go sooner. But he didn't. So maybe on the televised debate, I don't know if it would have got him any votes, Robin, but he could have said, I did what very few politicians do. I respect the fixed election date. I'm sticking with the and in a way he gave up one of the most strategic resources an incumbent First Minister has. To his credit, maybe at short term said, I want to earn a mandate. I'm going to show through policy initiatives in my response. And perhaps a sense that the last year or so of the Horgan government had been drifting a bit, maybe a little slow, not quick to respond to housing or the healthcare issues.
Well, or 12-hour waits at the emergency at hospitals. That doesn't go over very well politically either. I mean, he miscalculated on a bunch of stuff. And those are the practical things that people think about it when they come to vote. They're not worrying about all these great programs. They're saying, I just took my grandmother to the hospital and we spent 12 hours in emergency. Why would you vote for a government like that, right?
Number of ERs that were closed on weekends popping up again and again across the province. His campaign was run on a very negative basis too. There was very little of trying to sell, you know, why do I deserve a mandate? What have, you know, not only what have I achieved, what am I doing, but why give me another term? And it was more an attack campaign on John Rustad and his candidates. It clearly underestimated the strength of that blue wave. I think part of that is the role of the federal Conservative leader,
which we're going to get into in a minute.
Okay, sure.
So
John's
Michael,
got another question.
I have a forward, backward-looking question. Okay, so first of all, really appreciate your expertise as a political pundit. That's fantastic. Now I'm going to ask you about some of your comprehensive political science expertise. All right.
Okay.
We have now either an NDP or Conservative government minority. Obviously.
Yep.
Nobody's going to really be running this with a huge mandate. How difficult has this been to deliver programs and deliver good government over time? Some people are saying this is the best way to do it. I don't think that.
No. This is, you know, to use the phrase, a hung parliament in the real dramatic sense of it, that we are dangling in the air. If you think of the metaphor of hung, sometimes we use that hung parliament, and you have governments that have a strong minority. In other words, they haven't got a majority, but you know, the distance between them and the second place party is, you know, there's some daylight between them, and there's maybe some daylight between them in terms of popular votes. This is like razor thin, both on the popular vote. I mean, the difference is what, 90,000 votes? You know, when you count up 2 million plus voters, and at the end of the day, it's about 80,000. They've both got around 44% of the popular vote. You know, and the number of seats is basically tied. So you've got to, you're going into a legislature that, just the way our parliamentary Westminster system is designed, it's not designed for this. We with the first past the post system, which again we can talk about its pros and cons, but what it usually does is it produces a disproportionate margin of victory for the winning party. They earn more seats than they get in their vote, and the second and third place people get less than they deserve. And we kind of, if you lose the election, you moan and groan about it. Oh, they only got 40%. Well, look at Justin Trudeau. He forms a government. He's got 31% of the popular vote because of a 3 or 4 way split. Here we've got a good head-to-head race between two parties. Greens, of course, playing a role in some seats, of course, but head-to-head, and we basically have a tie. And how do you govern? You're right, John. This is so from a public service, public programming, things are going to be in neutral. They've been in neutral because of when the writ was dropped. Of course, you have what Robin and you would well know, we call it the interregnum period, where there's no new initiatives, you don't sign any new agreements, you're not launching any new commitments because yes, you've got a government still in effect, but on paper. But the tradition constitutionally in our system is you don't undertake anything new because it's a bit presumptuous from a democratic point of view that the bosses could change in 3 or 4 weeks. So you have to hold. If you're a deputy minister right now, you'd have your briefing binders ready to brief either an EB government or a Rustad government, but you don't know which one. and on a lot of issues, they're quite different in their direction. And so I would say until at least February or March, until we have some semblance of activity, John, in terms of a convening of the legislature, an effort at a speech from the throne, and a date for a budget, everything's still going to be on hold. So, whether you're a business person looking to invest in BC, or you're a First Nations leader hoping to continue negotiations on reconciliation, or you're any host of organizations, things are up in the air. They're on abeyance. So, we're a province in neutral.
We're also, Michael, a province that's really it's almost a split between urban and rural.
Yeah.
If you look at it's Victoria, which we always knew was going to be very strong NDP territory with a few exceptions, and Vancouver is steadfastly. It's even more NDP than I think it's ever been. There were some independents that got into those mixes that actually helped tilt towards an NDP seat. And then the rest of the province, for the most part, maybe the Kootenay's an exception, most of the rest of the province is Tory blue. Yeah. So is this really just the return of social credit versus the NDP? We've always had these splits between the people in the cities and the people that live in smaller communities and live in the interior, the people that work around the social fabric of the province, and, and the big unions and the universities and the government jobs, as opposed to people who work in industry and the resource sector. Is that just a continuance of all of that? Was that why it's broken down this way?
I think so. And in a way, when you look at the 2020 election, we start to appreciate, when you look at the 2017 and this one in 2024, they're like bookends. They're like, wow, it's like deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra would say, or that movie Groundhog Day, like, hey, we woke up to this movie. It's this, I've seen this movie before with just a few little, but you're right. This in a way, the 2020 election, John Horgan was able to, perhaps in hindsight, temporarily bridge that divide. The NDP had success in areas that historically had not, whether that was in Surrey, south of the Fraser River, or, Nelson, and there's other parts of the province. But you're right, we're returning to that classic, an old colleague, and you'll remember Ron Cheffins used to call, Michael, there's the NDP and Brand X. And Brand X sometimes was called social credit, sometimes it was called liberals for a brief period, BC United. Now, lo and behold, the BC Conservatives have come out of the political wilderness, and now they're Brand X. And when it comes down to that, there's this divide. And what's interesting, recently in this current election result, is the NDP are doing well in affluent riding. So the gains that had been won by Horgan over the 17 and 20 and 2020 elections were lost. And I knew they were going to drop some seats. But again, the fall was much more than I think their own strategists must have imagined. I think you saw on Saturday night Dave Eby, who was both stunned of the result, and a sense of personal responsibility for that and some humility. But again, fate's not in his hands right now. It's in those 49,000 mail-in ballots. That again just adds to the drama of we have to wait another week and see how that splits out.
We're aware we're almost out of time with you. I know
Okay.
John has a burning question to ask you about the federal scene and its
Okay.
relationship to what we just saw. John.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Michael, layers. Talking about layers here.
Yes.
The layer link now to the federal. No question, a lot of people voted conservative because they like
Yep.
Pierre Poilievre and
Yep.
the federal conservative message. And here we had Rustad having photo ops with Poilievre over here and all over the place. So do you think the federal conservatives are going to be studying this election around what to do and what not to do? Or do they not care? It's just BC, just the West Coast.
No, I think they care. I mean, I think the person who's probably most worried about that is Jagmeet Singh. I mean, half his caucus is from British Columbia. And what he saw Saturday night was a blue wave. We know there's going to be a blue wave that sweeps through British Columbia. So Pierre Poilievre and his people have got to feel very good. I think Mr. Rustad and his party, being so new and coming in, they benefited from a blue wave that in part came from Ottawa and the anti-Justin Trudeau sentiment. I think we can't underestimate that too. Of all the provincial governments in the country, the one that probably had the closest or coziest relationship with Justin Trudeau was the BC government, both John Horgan and Dave Eby, up until recently, where Mr. Eby trying to create a little bit of political distance between them. That old, let's, blame Ottawa,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of who's in power. But so in a way, he paid a price for being closely identified with Justin Trudeau and a very unpopular prime minister. And Mr. Rustad, I think, benefited tremendously from a conservative leader who is riding high in the polls. Everything suggests he's going to win a massive majority government across the country next year, whenever it's held. And that blue wave just sort of flowed down the Fraser and into Surrey and Richmond and up into parts of Greater Vancouver. Well, took the north, and we knew that, Peace River and so forth. There was a blue wave Saturday night, and some people have already said, John, if John Rustad was someone with a bit more charisma, he would have had a majority government Saturday night. Look how far he got with what little he had. And, and that's what he celebrated Saturday night in his speech this was historic. And it is. This was a fundamental realignment of the party system in this province. And whatever you want to call it, BC Conservatives, but certainly the BC United brand fell down. But being called Conservatives again and hooking onto that historic label and hooking into the contemporary federal initiative and momentum that Mr. Poilievre has, tremendous support for them. That was, I think, we can't underestimate that as a buoyant factor in this and kind of uplifting, despite all the scandals and misstatements by various candidates, including Brent Chapman in Surrey South, I think, or Surrey Centre. There was a wave, and the NDP did not see it coming.
Always fantastic to have Dr. Michael Prince. Didn't have a chance to mention that it also seems the ethnic vote has very strongly moved to the Conservatives. We saw that in Surrey, where a number of the Surrey seats have switched back to the Conservatives from the NDP, and in Richmond, the majority of Richmond seats, which is a very, very heavy Asian population, have switched over also to the BC Conservatives. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of the demographics of the province. And, we've got other elections to look forward to. I guess we're looking forward to it. We've got this U.S. election creeping up, and that's in November. Boy, it looks like Donald Trump could win that. We'll dig into that a lot deeper, and it's kind of scary times for the world, I think, if Donald Trump wins, but that's for another show. Also, the federal election is going to be coming up. I would suggest to you sooner than people think, but it will be next year. And boy, it could be ugly if Justin Trudeau decides to stick around. I think it's going to be an ugly defeat. If he leaves and someone else comes in as the white knight, will that be enough to overcome the blue wave? We'll have to wait and see. And really, with this BC election, if it still stays just a 1 or 2 seat difference, a tiny minority or a tiny majority for either side. How long do we continue with this particular government? Are we not back next year, perhaps, in another BC election? So many things to think about, John, but now time to wrap up another show. Before we go, perhaps explain to our fine viewers how they can follow the Rumble Room on our various platforms.
I think we better wrap it up before another election breaks out. We've had so much fun, and we've had so many viewers commenting and viewing and being involved with our stuff during this election. I kind of want many more elections. Every 2 or 3 months would be great for the Rumble Room. And you can watch us on Twitter. We're on Facebook. All of our stuff and interviews is on YouTube. And of course, we're on Instagram. We have an audio podcast link, and we're also on Instagram. And about like 2.3 million people have been watching us so far. And I'm sure that number is going to go up because these elections are generating tons of interest. I remain clearly an enthusiastic follower of political drama, and there's so much of it. Keep on going, keep on trucking. I'm John Jurisic.
And I'm Robin Adair. I also encourage you to embrace the drama while you rumble on.